How deal you delicious people? Thank God for episode 4. Thank God for episode 4. Finally! Not a filler episode. Good God. If anything, I honestly don't like how episode 4 is just to again try to promote a movie that not a lot of people liked. But when looking at it, it's just like, well, we gotta keep forcing down people's throats that they need to watch every single Marvel film. And if you haven't, then sucks to be you kind of thing. But anyways, when looking at it, I went into here and I was like, episode 3 filler. I was kind of so tempted to just be like, you know what? I'm not gonna review another WandaVision show until ultimately we get to some kind of real answers here. Because I feel like everything is just to the point where I'll just wait to the very last episode and then review the whole rest of the season, and that's what I'll do. Because I was like, I don't want to do this episode to episode because there's not enough there to garner a to really garner me having to plop in here and to review an episode that has nothing but filler or there's not much to say. I could wrap the whole entire thing up in 10 minutes and be done with it, and I just don't like to do that. Reasonably, I can easily wrap up episode 3 for the most point in like 10, maybe less than that minutes. Because reasonably, it's just we have it to where we left off, and I ultimately just didn't want to mention this. We ultimately have Wanda, who is now having a bun in the oven towards the end of episode 2, and so now in episode 3, we are very much to focus on the whole bun in the oven situation, the pregnant situation, and so reasonably I will get into that. So episode 3 we kind of get hints at little bits of answers, and then episode 4 it seems like, oh, here are some answers. But I think towards the end of this review I'm gonna have to take time to ultimately make my consensus of what's going on, and I could completely be off, way off, because I know Marvel is usually like way smarter than I am, and or if anything, I'm probably way overthinking, way too beyond much of anything. I'm kind of, if anything, I'm kind of a little bit going into here, just going like, man, how much is Wanda and Vision going to have to do after this show? Hopefully, they're not going to get way too exhausted with having these characters not only be in this show, but eventually going right from a show and in between seasons, probably also doing movies. Unless there's some movies that can't even come out. Because Black Widow is almost getting close to being pushed to Disney Plus at some point, because there's nothing that, there's no other way for Black Widow to come out at this point. And plus, it's like, well, let's take either a hit in the theaters, or let's take a hit in Disney Plus, or ultimately we're just like, we're never gonna get this movie out. There's so much merchandising that is being just sitting on a shelf somewhere, and so yeah, like. But anyways, let's ultimately mention that reasonably episode 4 is kind of like a lead up from day one kind of thing, and showcasing a lead up. Like, it's not saying every little thing, which is kind of annoying. So I'm hoping in other episodes we kind of get a much more better lead up of how exactly like every bit and piece that ultimately is part of this puzzle that will help us figure out what is really going all completely on here. Like just little scenes that maybe open up every episode to just be like, oh, okay, so this is where we get to point Wandavision environment. I getcha. Okay. I would love the little kernels of just scenes that are leading us up to where Wanda and Vision are now. And I think that episode 4 does that, but reasoning it's like, okay, it just is like, it doesn't exactly quite put the pieces there, quite, like, put all up in there. It doesn't really exactly, like, if anything, I would have guessed I would do have guessed that I would have to put much more pieces together, um, because ultimately, yeah. So let's go into spoilers of these episodes because recently episode 3, there's not much to talk about. There's not much. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil. But wait a minute. So episode 4 is worth watching. I will finally cement that the episode 4 is worth the watch. I think if you haven't seen any of this show, just wait till episode 4 and just watch that. Because reasonably, much of the lead up to any of this stuff is a boatload of who cares. To be brutally honest, a lot of this stuff is just filler. But recently, you could just watch to this point. If you had one day off, you could catch up with this entire thing. And, like, I think episode 4 is actually worth the watch. So maybe past 4 will actually have a seemingly a good amount of episodes after this that'll actually give us and solve us a lot of things. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. Recently, I've never really been impressed with any Marvel shows, and I think WandaVision hasn't really cementingly done that for me. To make me go, oh yeah, but this has changed now. Everything has changed. Man, I hated. I honestly didn't enjoy Agent Carter. I just kind of just tolerated it, to be brutally honest. Like Marvel Agents of Shield, like through most of the first season, I was like, I don't care for this show. I didn't care for much of it being like a tie-in to the movies and stuff like that. And when watching it further, even like I watched every single season. I watched every single season of Marvel Agents of Shield, and I was like, God, this show is garbage the entire way. But ultimately, like someone else was watching it, and I just kind of watched it via me just needing something to just watch on top of whatever I was also doing. I was multitasking. Like I was watching something that I actually did enjoy, and then I was watching Marvel Agents of Shield just by just kind of just hearing some of the sounds and stuff that was going on, and ultimately I was like, God, this show still sucks. It still sucks. Through episode 1 of pilot on just was a fart in the river. So, but ultimately with WandaVision, I felt like the first 3 episodes were like, man, I could just go and watch a YouTube video and get all the Easter eggs, and then just nothing else mattered. Or little hints of what actual story. I could watch an entire review about the first 3 episodes and not have to watch them, and then just go on episode 4 and I'm like, yeah, this is great. So let's go on into going into, yeah, so episode 3 now is all the times of which that we have spoilers. So we're going into here now. So reasonably, episode 3 is the episode of pregnancy. The whole entire evolution of a 9 month, whatever period thing. An entire pregnancy all done in one simultaneous episode. So, we ultimately have it to where reasonably Wanda is ultimately going and being all pregnant, but she's being pregnant abnormally quick, to where reasonably we have it to where they are already like painting a room for their child. They are naming the child. Ultimately, they're kind of back and forth about Tommy or Billy for the name, but they haven't even confirmed if it was a girl or a boy or whatever. We ultimately have it to where seemingly the doctor that is seeing them is ultimately like putting forth the goofiest answer for how people can be like could have a baby. Because we have it to where the doctor is like, well, when two people really love one another, it's like, yeah, that's. So, in other words, you can't actually say the words like sex and you can't actually go into the act of whatever. No, because this isn't like an HBO show or a Showtime show. Um, so, ultimately, we have to have like a very goofy response for everything. So going into here, we ultimately have it to where the doctor is ultimately checking on Wanda, and so reasonably we have to where Wanda is seemingly going to have to hide the fact that she is pregnant, to the point where she's wearing like big farting coats, fur coats, and stuff like that to ultimately hide her belly, because reasonably we're having to where she is being pregnant way too quickly, to the fact of like her basically being able to deliver two children within seemingly the ability of one day. And I'm like, wow, okay, all right. So, and here's the thing, it seems like we also get a moment here where at some point we have Vision, who is seemingly starting to come up with some answers, but then we eventually have Wanda who is editing this episode to where Vision doesn't have any answers. So because I think especially this kind of cements this after episode 4, and we'll get to this, but again, I still think that like this is under the real power and or control of Wanda. I've been thinking about this entire time, that it's like this has got to be something to do with Wanda, and ultimately I don't think that there actually is a real true villain in this story anymore. Like I thought there was, but I don't think there is now. And I think everybody is thinking that, oh, well, maybe there's going to be a villain in this show. I don't think there is. I think the only real true villain of this show is ultimately going to be Wanda herself. And I think episode 4 really kind of cements that, I think, if anything else. Or maybe not. Spoilers, maybe. So, maybe there's somebody behind all this that ultimately is controlling Wanda. I don't know. But I doubt it. So, going into this, we have it to where Wanda is seemingly doing an abnormal pregnancy where it seems like hours are ultimately going to get her to have a child, and we have it to where Vision is kind of just freaking out about it, and then we ultimately have it to where seemingly Wanda ends up going and having her water break, and we have it to where it seemingly is raining in this house, which I thought that was an interesting visual. And so Wanda ends up saying that, oh my god, I think my water is broke. And we have to where ultimately Vision is scrambling to grab this doctor that I guess was supposedly going to go on vacation, but then he has a issue with actually leaving because you know how it is in small towns. You just can't escape. Whatever the heck that means. In other words, you can't escape this place because reasons. So we have it to where ultimately Vision is scrambling to get this doctor, and so he kind of like the doctor kind of piggybacks off of Vision, and so they end up kind of like running to get back to Wanda. And so while that is going on, we have Geraldine, who is seemingly with Wanda, and we also at some point had Vision, who is checking out his neighbors. Evidently, one of his neighbors is ultimately seemingly, I think, Herb, is like he is chainsawing like this brick thing, and I'm like, okay, what the heck is going on? Why is he chainsawing this brick thing? And that made no sense to me. But ultimately, they had to repair it afterwards. So we have it to where Vision is coming up to some, coming and watching some like bizarre things going on with this town, as well as there being like a beekeeper before. But episode 4 will ultimately maybe solve some things. Let's just say. Anyways, so we ultimately have it to where Geraldine is ultimately seemingly seeing that that ultimately Wanda is pregnant, because we have it to where it seemed that there was some stork that arrived, and it is kind of like jockeying around the house, and Geraldine is ultimately quite possibly being able to see this stork, and Wanda is ultimately just like, oh my god, the stork. So we have to ultimately this stork is consistently, bizarrely, going and fitting in with this home, and at some points kind of like hiding itself. So we have it to ultimately Geraldine is ultimately noticing that eventually that that Wanda's having contractions, and so we get it to where eventually to where the doctor is scrambling with Vision to make it there, but we have it to where ultimately we have to where Geraldine ultimately is to basically just deliver this baby. Or what to we or assume is just a one baby. So we have it to where Geraldine is to forcibly deliver this child, and then the doctor arrives, and he's just like, "Oh my god, baby! Like, isn't this great? Uh, like we ran here so fast it felt like we were flying." So, if anyways, we have Vision, who is ultimately calling his first son Tommy, and Wanda is all like, "Oh my god, yeah, it's Tommy." So we ultimately feel that everything is going to be done and over with. Um, but instead, we have to where Geraldine is kind of going off to the side, and so is the doctor, and they kind of go on to their own, to where Vision can ultimately go into uh, his own vision disguise or undisguise as his actual vision as a robot, and so ultimately we have it to where Vision can see, or Vision can be himself around his child, and so we have it to where Vision is holding Tommy, but then we realize that, oh my god, Wanda is pregnant yet again, and still ultimately still gonna have to shell out another child, I guess, which ultimately is Billy. So I'm going to get into after episode 4. I'm going to come to some conclusions about what's going on with this show. So I think, if anything, the only worthwhile thing is seeing the conclusions of what I'm going to come with after episode 4. So we have it to where now the doctor is saying, oh my god, 10 fingers and or 20 fingers and 20 toes. Ooh, yeah, high five, everybody. Yeah, baby, child's, look at this. And so we ultimately have it to where the Doctor and Vision are going out into their street, or into their yard, and we have it to where Vision is ultimately saying, like, "Hey, Doctor, you can go on your vacation now." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna make it on my vacation because this small towns can't escape." So you ultimately have it to where Vision is ultimately talking about the power that had gone out with his neighbors, and ultimately we have it to where Vision is talking to his neighbors and everything seems weirdly and oddly uncomfortable. We have it to where it's seemingly Herb and uh, what is the other girl's name? What is Angus? Agnes? Agnes. There we go. Um, Ultimately, they're talking about, like, hey, yeah, that Geraldine, is she with? Is she with that Wanda? And ultimately, Vision's like, yeah. It's like, well, yeah, she doesn't have a home here. Yeah, she's kind of the new one, kind of thing. And I'm like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Yeah, it seems like Geraldine is the one that is supposedly sticking out of all of them. It seems like Geraldine is the one person that came here a little bit later, if you know what I mean. Episode 4. So we have it to where ultimately Geraldine is ultimately with Wanda, and the neighbors are kind of telling Vision to be like, you know what, you should probably be a little bit concerned about Geraldine. Maybe there's something that is ultimately going to upset order of things, and so on and so forth. So we ultimately have it to where reasonably Geraldine is talking to Wanda, and so ultimately Wanda is kind of singing a little song to her sons, and ultimately she had mentioned that, hey, yeah, like, I had ultimately sang the same song to my brother Pedro. And we have to where Geraldine is like, oh yeah, like, uh, that's the guy that ended up getting killed by Ultron. And we have to where Wanda's like, squeeze me? What did you say? And Geraldine's like, I thought your babies looked neat. That's all I was saying, kind of thing. Like, I think they're really cool. I bet it's just a matter of time before they can move mountains, kind of thing, or whatever the crap that she says, because it doesn't really matter. And we have it to where Wanda's like, no. What did you say about my brother? What did you say about the movie from Age of Ultron? What did you say about that? Did you ruin the ending for everybody in the world that hasn't seen Age of Ultron and also WandaVision? So we have it to where Wanda ends up just making Geraldine, I would assess, go away. Because we end up having it to where we see that Geraldine is ultimately seemingly out of this WandaVision bubble, and she is just out in the grass field somewhere with her still her weird time period attire, and she's ultimately just kind of like, I'm just gonna lay here because I don't know what else happened. I don't know what's going on. And plus, she ultimately, when we'll get to episode 4, and we'll get to kind of the more kind of behind the scenes of that. So episode 4 kind of gave us a little hints of answers, but when looking at it, I was still just like, you know what, this is still just like a filler episode. I can't wait till we get to more modern time television in this show, and we'll see where that goes. So, episode 4. So, episode 4 takes us to, from right off of the Thanos snap, we have it to where ultimately when everyone came back. So this is much more of the Iron Man snap. If you've never seen Avengers Endgame, that's what happens. So Iron Man snap. So this is the Iron Man snap where ultimately we have people who is coming back. And of course, who comes back is Monica Rambeau. I'll just call it Rambo. But Monica. So we ultimately find out that Monica had come back from the Iron Man snap, and so reasonably we have it to where Monica is coming back to find out Geraldine is Monica, so they're one and the same. So Monica is to come back to find out that her mother, who had not been snapped and not have been snapped anywhere, that didn't affect her. So we find out when Monica comes back from Iron Man. So she finds out that her mother had been killed by cancer, she was dead. She was killed brutally by a illness. So we find out that mother is not only the same mother of Captain Marvel, his best friend, who ultimately was the jet pilot person, that ultimately was, so reasonably we have toward the little girl that ultimately, Captain Marvel gave her jacket to, is ultimately this girl older. So I'm like, man, so wait a minute. So not only do we have like decades of time to stroll into, not only do we have Thanos and Iron Man snapping going on, but now we also have to deal with the fact that in episode 4, Monica has to tell us everything that has led us up to episode 1 of WandaVision, to the very more recent episode where she had gotten tossed through a brick wall and every other thing to ultimately be sucked out of Wandavision world, to ultimately be plopping down into the grassy field where that was to have left off. So episode 4 is really just a whole kind of, hey guys, you see all the Easter eggs? Well, now we're going to solve all those by showing you the behind the scenes of what other people are trying to do to fix what is to go on with this WandaVision. Showcasing what had happened with the radio signal and all kinds of stuff. So we have it to where ultimately Monica is to have gone into Agents of S.W.O.R.D., ultimately to go on to here and eventually be a part of this group that is to solve this environment bubble, this Westview. It seems bizarrely that the people who are of around Westview ultimately don't even know it exists. But bizarrely, it seems like these special agents know full well that the Westview exists and know full well that they could be able to intercept into this environment. We ultimately have seemingly where there are drones of sorts that consistently go within this city or within this bubble, this WandaVision bubble. and we were ultimately to see what is to be dropped into there. We were to assume by any number of uh, Easter eggs. So going into here, I'm like, okay, so that kind of solves all those Easter eggs of why all of a sudden like we were to see the colorful planes and stuff like that, because they kept sending drones in to figure out what is going on with this whole WandaVision thing, and it seems like there were very few people that ultimately could actually go into this WandaVision thing, but eventually it seems that. Uh, we eventually have it to where Monica ends up just walking her way into WandaVision, and she just gets sucked into all of this. Um, but eventually she goes into there to just play a role at some point. We ultimately have it to where seemingly there's a hazmat guy that ends up kind of walking under the sewer to see if he will be affected by this place. And we eventually see a beekeeper that ends up coming from out of this sewer, which is actually the hazmat guy that was trying to see if he can get underneath the WandaVision city, and he just becomes a beekeeper in this town. So I was like, wow, that is actually really interesting. So we ultimately have to tie in Darcy Lewis from the Thor movies. Evidently, she is an astrologist or whatever scientist thing that she ultimately needs to be to figure out what the heck is going on with here. So because ultimately they have a group of scientists, but she's like the only one that seemingly is coming up with the answers for everything. And so recently, I guess they just fired all the other schmucks just to have her just figure out every single little thing. She ultimately finds and figures out that ultimately, hey guys, we need an old fashioned TV. Like a tube TV. It can't be a flat screen, or it can't be an LCD or a plasma. It has to be an old fashioned TV. So we ultimately have it to where they are just all of a sudden just watching WandaVision, and so they themselves are otherwise putting the pieces together. Like basically like saying like who Mr. and Mrs. Hart is, who all these people are coming into here. So what I'm assessing is probably happening is Wanda was ultimately sent to live in this town, and then finding out some news about something ultimately made her uh, have this kind of cocoon and or bubble around this world, which ultimately sucked all these people that were already in Westview into this WandaVision world. Because ultimately we found out that seemingly that there was some agents that were uh, ultimately had lived in this environment that were kind of sucked into this story. So so we end up having and finding out that ultimately they end up trying to like try to communicate with Wanda, and we have it to where eventually Jimmy Woo is a course a agents of sword person that is ultimately the guy who had been on the radio ultimately asking Wanda Wanda questions like who's doing this to you, Wanda? How can we help you, Wanda? Blah blah blah. Um, we'll ultimately find out that Darcy and Jimmy were working on being able to tap into the frequency of that radio in that WandaVision land, to ultimately Wanda could ultimately wake up from all this. So reasonably so we figured out kind of all the Easter eggs that kind of at some point didn't make sense. Maybe we didn't exactly tie into all the commercials. Like I don't think we 100% tied into like Stark, or we didn't tie into Strucker or Hydra or something like that. but I think maybe any number of these things are to ultimately uh, tell us about Wanda's backstory, I would assess. But I don't know. Reasonably, that isn't 100% like made us understand a lot of everything. Like, anyways, but I don't know. There's kind of some windmills kind of going around on that one, anyways. But so pushing on. So I think that's kind of all of what kind of really happens for the most point of episode 4. And I really liked episode 4, and because ultimately it was like, oh, thank God, they're finally giving us freaking answers for the longest time. But even those answers were just. It was a lot of flimsy. It was a lot of flim. But ultimately, I'm hoping that more episodes will give us more answers. Um, Hoping there's a lot more lead up to exactly all of everything. But anyways, so reasonably we have it to where Monica is ultimately in this environment, and they realize that Monica is there playing that role that ultimately they are to give her in this show, or the WandaVision show. So we have it to where eventually we get to when Monica is ultimately talking to Wanda about her brother and how she died via being Ultron. And so we finally find out that Wanda, ultimately, I guess, when somebody does something that she doesn't like, again, there is editing going on with this show where ultimately Wanda uh, makes it to where they are edited. Well, in this time we have it to where Wanda ends up starting to use her magic against Monica because ultimately Monica is giving a little bit of, hey, yeah, I'm gonna make you remember that your brother died by Ultron. And so Wanda's like, who are you? Who are you really? And we have to ultimately, we have Wanda eventually using her magic to make Wanda go through a brick wall and to go through every single wall until she gets out of this Wandavision environment. Like, I guess she's banished. So, we're to find out that Wanda finally is quite possibly all knowing of what's really going on. And we have it to where when Vision ultimately comes back into the house, wondering where Geraldine had gone, and Wanda had said that Geraldine had left. I guess left forever. When Vision comes back in, Wanda is looking at Vision in a different way. Because ultimately, we find out that we see Vision, who has his yellow crystal, is still gone from when he had died from Thanos. So I'm like, oh my god. So, in other words, Vision is quite possibly still dead, but Wanda is probably so powerful that she's making him hop and dance around like he's a real boy. And I'm like, oh my god, this is so interesting. I'm like, wow, like, so we finally can, like, make it make sense to where recently Vision is still a dead corpse, but he's the equivalent of a zombie robot that it was is ultimately just to be dancing around at the whim of Wanda. And like, I thought that this was so interesting. And so that's how we just kind of end this episode 4 with just the shocking conclusion that Vision is probably still dead, but is just hopping and jumping for Wanda. Um, because reasonably we have it to where Recently, all of this is to finally cement when Wanda is to come back from all this, from being Iron Man unsnapped, that, or in this case, Hulk. So Thanos, and then Hulk, and then Iron Man, and then everybody, and because that's what so Hulk, not Iron Man, because you know what I mean. Anyways, I did the wrong at the wrong. You know what I mean. So when everybody came back from, then yeah. So going into here now, here are my thoughts. Here are what I think is going on. So God, this is taking 40 minutes. I didn't want to take it that long. So here are my thoughts now. One, Wanda is creating this entire bubble. Why? Because I think after she found out, after she came back, that she found out that she was pregnant. I think during Infinity War and towards the end of Infinity War, when Thanos snapped, that and Scarlet was gone. Before that moment, her and Vision, I think, had a child then. And then I think when Hulk brought everyone back via Snap, Wanda realized after that when she came back, that she was pregnant. And so she had realized that she was pregnant and is now really grieving over the fact that, one, she is going to have children and their father is not going to be there. Or what also could happen is that recently Wanda could have had the children fairly quickly, like it has been, and maybe her children might have been ripped away from her, because ultimately her children are, at some point, valuable. Maybe it's going to be the whole Strucker thing again, where we have um, to where considering like Strucker had been, just kind of burrowed away or something, or not Strucker. Somebody tied to Hydra had ultimately wanted to look after Scarlet Witch to eventually steal her children, and or whatever offspring. Anyways, it could be possibly, who knows. But my thought is that Scarlet Witch is having a very big problem with ultimately wanting to protect her children. And so, reasonably, we have it to where Wanda is creating this entire bubbled WandaVision universe that ultimately is clean and pure and ultimately everything that she wants, because anything that is to interrupt her bubble is ultimately going to have to be dealt with and taken out by her. So that is what I think is going on. So there is no villain here. The only villain is that Wanda wants to protect her children. And ultimately, I'm assuming that we are eventually at some point going to get some big characters here to stop all this, to have Wanda ultimately just have her whole entire uh, her West View, taken down, because uh, reasonably it's wrong to keep all these people bottled here into this town. And so we might have to have eventually Doctor Strange come in here and nerf this entire city to where people can roam free again, um, and to where they can, because ultimately it's not all their faults that ultimately Wanda had gone into this town and ultimately realized she had been pregnant, so she had created this bubble around this city, because she is just like, her powers are protecting her children, is what I'm assessing. So I could be wrong about this, or maybe because I just don't think that there is a villain in this story. And if there is, maybe the villain is um, somehow related to how Wanda had gotten her children. Because recently I think there had to have been a deal made somewhere to have Vision and Wanda, of course, make children because Vision is a artificial life form. But I think there's so much stuff about um, Avengers Infinity War that we don't know about. Because recently Wanda and Vision had gone on to their own, and recently we have it to where eventually Vision had, of course, died off in that movie. And I'm hoping I'm getting to the right film because otherwise that would suck if I am talking about the entire wrong movie. But anyways, so Wanda is her own villain, and reasonably the threat of or threat the otherwise knowledge of pregnancy and realizing that she has no brother or no husband to protect her into the future, maybe that is just making her realize that, well, maybe I'm going to need to get some more mutants in here. Maybe I'm going to have to have my vision come back, my vision husband come back to life. I'm going to bring back my brother at some point, which I'm assuming that's probably going to happen, maybe. And I'm assuming we're probably just going to have just Wanda just bringing back everyone from the grave, or otherwise just bringing all these mutants, all these X-Men, all to this world. And I'm assessing that's what's going to happen eventually, is that Wanda is going to bring the mutants to the MCU, and that's why I'm assessing that they're going to have certain characters come into the fray, because we're going to have a lot of introductions of characters pretty soon that are going to be introduced into the MCU at some point. So I'm really kind of interested to where this show will end. Because again, I think the next three episodes are all going to be right back into uh, what I think is going to happen is we're going to get another three episodes of WandaVision and more Easter eggs and stuff like that, more irrelevant shows. And then the very last episode is going to come up with a big, huge thing where it's like, oh, okay, wow, this is amazing. We got to this part now. So I think the whole Agents of Sword thing that happened in episode 4 really is not going to mean a lick of anything until basically we resolve this whole thing. But I would like to say that ultimately we're going to get two different stories this entire time of what's kind of going on. But then again, I can't just immediately think that all of a sudden this show is just going to like go back to like recently. Yeah, I'm just thinking we're going to go back into Easter eggs. We're going to go back into just like, hey guys, let's try to put the pieces together. What's going on? And ultimately then like the last episode, which I'm assuming we're just gonna have 8 episodes in this season and then we're gonna be done. So that's gonna suck. Just because recently I was like hoping, I'm like, well, it'd be great to get like 12 episodes out of this one and then just call it a day. Because reasonably we have it to where I think Winter Soldier or Falcon and Winter Soldier are gonna be in March. So if we only have 8 episodes of this season, like, so we're just gonna be 8 and done with this one, and we're gonna have nothing till March, and then I think Loki is after that somewhere. So it's like that's gonna be garbage. So we're gonna have like months in between that are otherwise just gonna be like nothing. So I guess we're probably gonna have Black Widow probably having to be released sometime after sometime after WandaVision is done, is what I would assess, because when looking at it, it's like they need to keep giving new content and putting it consistently into Disney Plus. There needs to be a consistent flow of new content. You can't just have it to where it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have one big show a quarter and that's all. But I don't know. Maybe I'm hoping, considering these are only like 30 episodes or 30 minutes long, that maybe we'll do a lot more episodes of WandaVision. But I don't know. When looking at it too, they could just be going and just like, I don't know if there's gonna be like 20 some odd episodes of this show. I don't know. Recently, I would want to ask if anybody knows like how long this show is gonna last for, because ultimately, if it's like, oh well, it's gonna be like a 12 episode thing, that I'm like, oh okay, well then I can figure out that like every 4 episodes we're gonna get like a big bomb or whatever going on. So reasonably, it'd be like, because if it's only gonna be 8 episodes, I'm just gonna be like, okay, well, that was a short, brief thing to go into, but I'm hoping there's gonna be at least 12 episodes, and then we'll call it a wrap there. Because I think usually about 12 is usually about as many as they would go into. So I don't know. I'm gonna call it a wrap there. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.